So hello everyone, and welcome to our Harden Dairyman monthly webinar series. My name is Abby Bauer, and I'm an editor for Harden Dairyman magazine. The title of today's presentation is 3 Keys to Exceptional Hoof Health. Our presenter for today is the highly respected Karl Burgi, who is the founder of the Save the Cows Network and a hoof health provider and consultant who is known around the world. During the webinar, he will focus on lameness prevention through functional trimming and facility designs that can help support healthy hooves. This webinar is sponsored by Hooves, and we are grateful for their support of today's webinar. My co-host for today is Mike Hutchins, a professor emeritus from the University of Illinois. Our other team members include our webinar producer, Jim Baltz, and our Harden Dairyman online media manager, Patty Hurchin. If you're listening to the presentation live, you have access to a PDF copy of the slides that you can print out for future reference. That handout can be found in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. If you push on that little arrow, you'll see 2 options for the handouts, and you can print those out and take notes on them if you would like to. I'll also point out the questions section. If you have any questions that come up during Karl's presentation, feel free to type those in, and we will answer them toward the end of the webinar. So we encourage you to do that. At this time, I'll ask you, Mike, to take a few more moments to further introduce Karl, and then we'll begin our presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Abby, and it is my personal privilege and professional honor to introduce our speaker for today, Karl Burgi. Karl grew up in Switzerland and was over at the University of Wisconsin Farm Short Course in 1980. In 1995, he traveled to Holland to get some advanced training on hoof care and knowledge transfer, and his activities really took off at that point. You will associate Karl with the Dairyland Hoof Care Institute. That's located in Baraboo, Wisconsin. Karl has traveled around the world to 50 different countries and has trained over 4,000 individuals onto properly caring of hooves on dairy cattle. He puts on a number of popular webinars. I believe this is his 2nd or 3rd one with Harden Dairyman. He also goes and involved with new facility designs and, of course, on-farm consulting as well. And, of course, his passion and his business mission is save cows. So I'm very thrilled to have with us today and turn over the program to Karl Burgi.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's my great pleasure to be part of this webinar again with Harden Dairyman, and also many thanks to Hooves for sponsoring this webinar. And for this particular webinar, I'm going to take a little bit different direction. I'm going to go back into looking how we can manage inflammation, a little bit about timed functional hoof trimming, and then the walking surfaces. So I went back in some of the data and some of the information that we gained the last few years and presenting that. Because my last webinar was mostly focused on digital dermatitis and some of that, I will not spend a lot of time on that because people can go back to view that webinar online. But we'll answer some questions at the end. So when we get started here, for me, this is a lame cow because we can see here, we can see how she, I got to make a quick change here. We can see how she holds this foot up. She holds this foot up, and for me is who identifies her, who is responsible for the treatment, and what is done for the prevention. That's what we're going to talk about. As an example, this is an early acute digital dermatitis lesion. They're not easy to spot if we don't look closely because she would walk quite normally, but when she stands like she did there, that's what it shows. So when we look at lameness around the world, and many of you will probably have seen this slide before, but it goes anywhere from 8.3 to 54.8%. And these are all cited studies that were done. Nigel Cook compiled them. And in 2015 in Wisconsin, there are 60 top or 200 top herds or 60 top herds had a 13.2% lameness. at 41 kilos of milk per cow per day. But the mean is still lameness around the world is about average about 25%. So we got a lot of work to do. But what I want to do here is start with a question. Which statement describes low lameness herds the best?
Chance to vote. We have four answers there. Let's go ahead and start voting. These are tough questions, so it'll just test the mentor, the mettle of our attendees. Low lameness herds, great cow comfort and trimming cows 2 times a year, one choice. Second choice, managing practices that promote animal well-being. Third, great cow comfort and treating lame cows within 48 hours. And the fourth choice is great cow comfort and utilizing a hoof bath. Abby, are you going to vote on this one? I think I know what I'm going to vote for.
I think all of these things would help, but I'm going to go with the general practices that promote animal well-being. What are you choosing, Mike?
I'm going to go to the third one, great cow comfort and treating lame cows within 48 hours. So obviously, Karl, there's going to be a mixed opinion on that. And I'm looking, we've got 2/3 of the vote in. So Jim, let's go ahead and close the poll and we'll post this. Karl, can you see the results there?
Yes, I can see them now. And we can see here, we've got almost a third and a third and a third. And for me, I guess number 1, number 3, and number 4, they all go into the management practices that promote animal well-being. They're all part of it. And that's what we're going to discuss a little bit more today. So with that, when we look at cited lameness risk factors, and these were all papers that were presented, done between 2009 and 2016, I think, 2016. What we see here when we have less lameness, we see deep-bedded stalls, solid floors, non-slippery floors. We treat lame cows within 24 hours. And access to pasture or outside, feed bunks, superior headlocks, wider stalls. When we have more lameness, we have mats, rubber mats, mattresses, slatted floors, slippery floors, damaged concrete, poor identification of lame cows, and some of the other things, the stall design, anything that goes along with poor cow comfort, and I would say narrow feed alleys is probably another one, especially in some parts of the world. So where cows get lame, okay? In general, the outside hind claw here is always where we find the sole ulcer, okay? White line lesions are on the outside hind claw. The general, that's 90%, always in this particular region here where the circle is. Toe ulcers can be all the way on both toes in the toe region. And then we have digital dermatitis, and we have foot rot or interdigital phlegmon. And what I'm going to do here quickly, I show what I mean. Here we have a sole ulcer, outside left hind claw. Important that sole ulcers are always blocked and typically trimmed properly. It's not, one of the key things is to remove all the loose horn and thin out the margins surrounding that sole ulcer. Also, we lower the heel on the outside claw when the sole ulcer is on the hind outside claw. Here we have a white line lesion, the same thing we can see here. She's blocked. We have lowered the heel, and we trimmed this white line lesion out very, very carefully. So the less damage we do to the corium, the better that animal is going to recover. It's just like if you guys skin your hand or your finger, you're only going to cut the loose skin away. You're not going to cut half of the finger away to get it to recover. And we need to think about is that the corium is there to produce horn again in the future. So we have to be careful, which means we need to have very, very sharp knives. The other thing is blocks are always needed. And one of the things you can see on both of these blocks, because I'm not going to show a lot more about that, they come to the end of the heel. They provide adequate rest. They're maybe sometimes even stood up more on the toe. So we grind away on the toe end of the block to get them to stand up especially with a sole ulcer or with a white line. And then we have the other three diseases that we talked about. Toe ulcers, of course, this is not blocked at this time, but it's just a great picture. So this is a toe ulcer in a grazing cow, was caused, probably one of the biggest problems with grazing cows on larger grazing farms with long walking distances. The soles become too thin, and eventually we get a toe ulcer produced. And so you can see here, because the claws are completely flat, that means there was a lot of wear. That's not normal for grazing cows, but that happens when they walk long distances, when we have a lot of rain, wet tracks, or abrasive surfaces. So, and then we have digital dermatitis. This is an early acute lesion, and like we talked in the last webinar and all the information that's out there, it's crucial, in my opinion, to treat those early acute lesions with a topical antibiotic, because that guarantees us that they will not come. We have the best guarantee that they will not reoccur. But again, we need to catch them early. We need to catch them in the first 10 days, because past that, they migrate deeper into the epidermis and they become chronic, and they will reoccur and reoccur. The other quick thing to understand is that the early acute lesions are not the spreaders of the disease on the farm. In the laboratory, we could not produce new lesions from a lesion like that. We had to go to the chronic proliferated lesions to do that. So, and then we have foot rot. Probably another thing is, in some cases, research has shown that there is a better results if the early acute lesion is protected with a very light bandage for 24 hours. 24 hours means it needs to come off the next day, because after that it collects moisture, it collects dirt, and the most important part is after the initial treatment that the air gets to the particular lesion, so it helps recover that lesion. And that's the same thing with all clawhorn lesions. I never wrap clawhorn lesions, only time in case of bleeding with a pressure bandage, but clawhorn lesions recover much better if they're exposed to air, because no bacteria can grow on air. And then here we have foot rot, interdigital phlegmon or foul. Most important thing here is, this is why the early identification is crucially important. This is the only disease that my farms or we deal with around the world that needs immediate systemic antibiotics. Because that's how we get the best results. In most cases, people find them too late. The swelling is already too much, so the recovery is hindered by that. So that's the first thing. The other thing is to make sure that the loose horn in the interdigital space is carefully trimmed away, so it's not irritating that the necrosis between the claws any more than it already is. Here we can see a typical claw shape. What I saw, 20 years ago. And this picture is from Dr. Nuss. And you can see here on the right-hand side is the thermal imaging or the weight pressure plate results. And what the pressure plate results show, that after the facts, that lateral claw always has more trauma, more pressure, which the other thing is, this leads to more inflammation. And you can see here, it looked the same all the way around. And the inside claw, it's much more evenly loaded. And you can see the more pressure is actually in the toe on the inside claw. Now, I think we have this problem pretty much solved with functional trimming today, because new research that's coming out now shows things a little bit different. So going on, the results is no or not timely or incorrect prevention to me. So we could have prevented this by timely functional trimming, which I will show a little bit later. So there's some more. I said my talk was going to be about inflammation. Inflammation means swelling, pain, redness, or fever. And Barry Bradford from the University of Michigan at the Tri-State Clinician Conference said that it needed to drive the birthing process. It's needed there. It's part of the metabolic adaptation to the lactation. So anything that happens to patrician during calving, that maybe 3 to 5 days before calving to 3 to 5 days after calving, has to do with some swelling, some pain, some fever, and it's a normal thing. It's norming to occur. When it comes to the feet, the outcome is not observed until 6 to 8 weeks later in those claws. And that's what we're going to look about a little bit later. We're going to come back to that. But the other thing I wanted to do is that inflammation and the sequence leading to claw horn disruption lesion. And that's been much more talk about that. So we have a mechanical overload that leads to pain. That mechanical overload could be patrician, so heavy in calf, not trimmed correctly, extended standing time, too much wear. So if you have very abrasive surfaces, lack of hoof trimming, incorrect hoof trimming, lack of improper therapeutic trimming. There's many things that we could add on to this. But what happens is when we have this mechanical overload, that leads to pain. And what I think really, that pain leads to tendinitis or compromised movement. It's just like if I have a pain, I adjust my movement until I forget about it. So I might be for 3-4 days, I might have a little limp, and because my pain tells me I need to favor that. What that adjustment to the movement does to compensate for the pain, it causes damages to tissue. The cumulative damage to the internal organs. So what's happening is the bone development is justified, horn production tissue, vascular system, digital cushion or fat pad, all of those are receive some damage because of that inflammation. And what I'm going to focus on is the extra bone accumulation, because we know right now there is just a research presented on the digital cushion or the fat pad, and people can read that. It's online by James Wilson. He is the author that did the doctorate on that. But here is a picture of the pedal bone before and after inflammation. The one on the left is pretty much completely healthy. Maybe there is a little bit of extra bone right here. But you can see here, this one, I can't tell you what happened to this one. It's just something that I collected from abundance of slaughtered cow feet. So inflammation as an interaction between mechanical overload, aging neovessels formation, and pain management. And that came from Rees at 2013. So very interestingly, I've been collecting some pedal bones, and you can see here 12 months, 18 months, 24 months old. You can see on that 12 months old heifer how smooth that pedal bone looks, so pure. There's nothing really, no roughness, smooth, even the 18 months old. But already as the animal gets a little bit older, okay, we see a little bit of roughness on the bottom surface. We see a little bit of roughness right here where the extended tendon occurs. And what we have to think about is that in any situation, if those heifers, as an example, have thin soles, it causes inflammation, it causes roughening of the pedal bone, and more than likely, loss of the fat pad. Here, this is a 36-month-old animal, okay? And you can see here, this is the medial claw, this is the lateral claw. Look at how much rougher the outside is. Look at here on the lateral claw where the extended tendon attaches, okay? This is all from pain. We can see that in the video here just shortly what it does, pain and inflammation. So when we understand that is all the prevention has to focus on inflammation prevention, pain reduction, or pain elimination. Okay, so when we look at healthy claws, okay, healthy claws have a nice convex dorsal wall. They have a good fat pad. They have a nice looking pedal bone, good healthy corium. The corium looks like that, and you can see here how smooth that pedal bone is. When we have inflammation, okay, it changes everything inside of that claw. It changes, first of all, we can see here severe inflammation of the lamina, of the horn-producing tissue, the coronary corium. We can see a reduction of the fat pad between the left and the right. And we can see here that that pedal bone is not in the same shape as the one over on the healthy one. So the inflammation causes changes within the claws in a big ways, and there is no going back. So when we look at these two videos, to the left is a healthy one, normal, completely healthy, normal foot. On the right side, you can see there was lots of damage done because you can see extra bone here where the extended tendon attaches. There is extra bone where the deep flexor tendon attaches. There's some bone loss even in the point of P3. That's what keeps the chronic cows going. So the only thing we have to keep in mind is the more we can keep them in this particular shape, and that's what the rest of the discussion is about, the better off we are. When we look at data, you can see here, we have data here by months, and then down here by days in milk. And this is from the Midwest here. And you see high lameness in October, November, and then from December to May, June, very, very little problems, okay? And when we just look at the blue pillars, that's the white line lesions, virtually very little white line lesions in the wintertime compared, and then it goes up as it gets hotter. But the other interesting thing to look at is, look at all of this, most of this happening in early lactation. Here we're doing the mid-lactation trims. Here we're doing the dry-off trims. So a lot of these problems happening in that early lactation period when we just look at the blue ones. And you can see here, this particular farm has a very low incidence of sole ulcers. They're like 2% sole ulcers. Okay, there's months where they have probably not even 0.25%. But anyway, for me, having early lactation, standing in heat stress, have the highest risk for inflammation, and that's why we're seeing these pillars. This is all related to more standing time, more of that. So when we look at here on the left, we have healthy corium, we have inflamed corium. Standing cows have circulation restriction, which equals inflammation. And there's no better way to demonstrate what the standing cow does than putting pressure on a thumb. Down here, when we put pressure on it, the blood circulation is impaired. The blood circulation is impaired in times when we have the highest risk of inflammation. Calving and transition time, and heat stress time where cows stand extra because they're hot and they have to get rid of the heat. So, interesting to see is what happened here. A study, Nigel Cook, I was part of this, one of my farms did in 2006 with 14 cows. We look at laying down time in the stalls. Total time standing would be standing in the alley, standing in the stalls. And you can see here, feeding, drinking, milking is pretty equal across the board. And we did this 4 different months. We did this from June to September. September happened to be the hottest period where it was filmed. And the interesting thing, what came out of it is that in the hottest time, we had 3 hours of extra increase in total standing time on those cows over the coolest period. When we go on, what we can see here is we look at temperature humidity index. This is from the same dairy. So temperature humidity index is the black line. And we look at claw horn lesion rate, and this is over 5 years, okay? clawhorn lesions there's always about a 2 months lag time between the hottest day of the summer and the clawhorn lesion. And again here, when we look at 2006, when the study was done, maybe it was even a little bit more. It was even pulled out a little bit more because it was late in the summer. The rest of the summer didn't affect it so much. So what we know today is when cows are hot, okay, and they're laying down, they stand up, okay? When their body temperature gets up to 102 Fahrenheit, they stand up. And what's happening is when they're laying down, their body temperature increases when they're heat stressed at about 0.5 C, 0.75 Fahrenheit per hour when heat stressed. They only cool down at half of that when they're standing. So it takes much longer to cool off, so they lay down again. So something quite interesting that really put things home for me. What I want to show now is that why is it too hot to lay down? When we look at the resting human, a resting human produces about 200 BTUs per hour. Okay, most of you guys that are sitting in the chair listening to this, you're producing about 200 BTUs per hour. When you look at a cow that produces 27 kilos of milk per day or 60 pounds, she produces 2,500 BTUs per hour. When you put that at 36 kilos, it's 4,250. And when we put that at a 45 kilos or the 100 pounds of milk, that's 6,000 BTUs per hour. That's a lot of heat. 6,000 BTUs is a hairdryer, a 1,200 watt hairdryer on stage high. So for some of the people listening, turn some hairdryers on once in your house, and several of them. So when we look at milking times, it means from gate open to gate close. And you can see here in 2003, and there was another one that said about 3 hours of milking time is acceptable because it fits in with the rest of the daily time budget. So this was pretty much acceptable in 2003. For me, when we take 100 cows producing 100 pounds of milk or 45 kilos of milk in that holding pen here, we're producing 6,000 BTUs per hour. Now, if there's 200 cows, 300 cows, 400 cows, and they're standing body to body, what we need to understand is the fans or whatever we do in there has very little effect on those cows on the cooling side of it. The only way we can reduce the heat that's produced in the holding pen is by reducing the hours those cows spend in the holding pen per day. So bringing smaller groups in, because look at, if we put 400 cows to produce 45 kilos of milk into that holding pen, that's 2.4 million BTUs. Whoa, that could heat a lot of houses in the wintertime. So with that, I want to go on and go to the optimal trim time for hoof trimming. And I've been working in this field for many years and working with, as a herdsman, working with cows, working with producers closely. For me, there is this area here, the close-up, the fresh cow period. I don't want to put that cow in the trim chute. And then the other thing again too is in that 45 to 90 days, if they're lame, I have to put them in the trim chute. But for me, the focus is to do all the trimming, all the checking that we need to do in the green periods. And because the goal is for me to have no lameness occurring in those red periods, because we know what happens when lameness happens here. We know what happens when lameness happens here. Here we delay breeding, we reduce milk production. Sometimes the cows don't stay in the herd. When it happens here, we definitely delay breeding and we reduce peak production. So we want to have no lameness. So for me, that's the last time I want to bring a cow into the trim chute is about 3 weeks, 21 days before calving. So if a cow needs to be checked, let's check her the day she goes in the close-up or a couple, 3 days the week before to give her that window off. Because especially with chronic cows. And then for me, a lot of times I try to check them again at 30 to 45 days. So we're free sailing into that 90 to 125 day range, because a lot of times if I check them at 30 to 45 days, we're good to 120 days. So here's the next survey question. A 2004 survey of hind feet collected at slaughter revealed the following.
Okay, very good, Karl. Let's see another tough question, Abby. The first choice is 4% of the feet were trimmed and 50% showed trimming errors. The second choice, 35% of the feet were trimmed and 10% were showing trimming errors. The next choice, 10% of the feet were trimmed and 90% were showing trimming errors. And the fourth choice, 15% of the feet were trimmed and 25% were showing trimming errors. Wow, boy, is that a tough one. I think I know what I'm going to do. Abby, what are you thinking? Since you're ahead of me, you're ahead of me this on right answers.
I have to pick first, right? I will go with the fourth choice. What are you picking, Mike?
I'm going to go with fourth choice as well. It's don't ask me why, but to me, it just kind of makes a little bit more sense to me at this point. Our voters are slowly coming in here. They're really thinking pretty hard out there as well. But Jim, we're at 2/3. Let's stay on time schedule. Let's go ahead and post this and see, Abby, what happened. Wow. Okay. Karl, what's your take on this?
Well, I did the survey myself with about 2,500 feet in 2004. And it was 10% of the feet were trimmed, 90% showed trimming errors. And the thing to tell you is that it really hasn't changed much. Now, I pick them up from the Schlem slaughterhouse, so it might be a choice slaughterhouse for cows that can't walk as well. So anyway, so with that, I want to show trimming errors was mostly over trimming, trimming the wall, not properly blocking, removing the axial wall, or just taking too much off. So when we look at the functional claw shape, for me, that's the picture we showed before. It's about a 52 to 55 degree angle here. Plenty of sole thickness. We never want to have a sole that yields. When we have a sole that yields with pressure, we cause inflammation. Okay. Jerseys maybe a little bit 50 to 53, and then brown Swiss would be a little bit steeper. So for me, functional claw shape, this is a springing heifer, heifer before calving that came off a pasture. By trimming the toes, we increase that angle. By modeling the lateral claw, we prevent that first part of inflammation, which I'll show you in a little bit. And then on the right here, these are two perfectly trimmed feet, and a left rear and a right rear. And when we put that on the pressure plate, I pretty much guarantee there's very little pressure on here, because all the pressure is on the hoof wall. The hoof wall is what's supposed to carry the weight. So this is a type of trimming that we're doing today, that we're teaching today, which has been quite successful around the world. And now what I want to get into is choosing not to functional trim heifers prior to calving causes this redness here on that lateral claw. See, this was 30 days after calving on one of my farms. This heifer didn't make it to the dairy before I was there, so we trimmed it right afterwards. For me, that first hemorrhage, the damage is already done to the digital cushion. There's probably already a little damage done to the pedal bone at that point in time. So that's why, for me, it's such an important part. So the other thing is, for me, there was a question that was trimming based on yield. For me, going back to what we talked about before, I think the trimming is much more crucial, because we need to make sure those vulnerable times, those critical periods, we don't have to intervene on those cows, because that's what we do in the highest yielding herds, and it's been a system that's been working very well. So this one here will develop a sole ulcer later in life. Another interesting thing here is I trimmed this heifer a year ago, and I asked the manager, okay, what happened to her here about 60 days ago, 50, 60 days ago? And he said, well, she had pneumonia 3 days before calving. And when we brought her in, you can see here, left front, she had a severe hemorrhaging. Left rear, she had a strong hemorrhage. Right rear, she had a strong hemorrhage. So we had calving in combination with pneumonia, which is inflammation, caused us problems. If she would have been modeled prior to calving, there wouldn't have been a sign. So trimming heifers before calving, I think it pays off all over. I've done it on grazing herds in Australia. I've done it in grazing herds in South America, in Switzerland, and the results are always, sometimes we can't do much, right? We can do very little, but just standing them back up, model that lateral claw is a huge important part, okay? So what do we do for prevention? Calving is the highest risk. Every animal enters the close-up pen with perfect claws. So functional trimming 8 to 3 weeks prior to calving. No lameness in close-up and during calving, and in fresh pen. No overcrowding, and best cow comfort for those cows, because we need to have them lay down as much as possible to reduce that inflammation. When they're standing, we know, we showed it before, there's a reduction of circulation, and it won't work. So when the prevention succeeds, this is what happens. Very little lameness in those first 90 days. And this was in a dairy where the time period when we actually moved to a new facility. So we had a couple of thin soles, a couple of toe ulcers here, just from the extra work, moving into the new facility. The green bars are digital dermatitis. And you can see here, because I score all 5 stages of digital dermatitis, at the mid-lactation trim or the dry cow trim, there's a lot of digital dermatitis, even though there may be M4s, not active. And you can see here, we had a couple of white lines, very few white lines here, but that's what I want to see. I don't like to see a lot of lameness. Here we can actually see a couple of cases of foot rot in that 31 to 60 day, which is quite common for early lactation cows. But that's my goal. My goal for the trimming is look at the data, collect good data, look at the data, set that trimming schedule up. If I would have more lameness in here, maybe some of those high maintenance cows need to be done on that 30 to 45 day, especially on the back feet. Remember, all those cows, chronic cows, maybe need to be done 4 times a year. Older cows that have an issue. If they've never had a sole ulcer, first, second lactation, third lactation, she probably can stay on the normal schedule. Okay. And what I'm seeing is all sole ulcers are in 4th, 5th lactation cows and over. The other thing is we need to increase the trimming when we have rubber floors, because in rubber floors, the more rubber we have, the less wear there is, unless we have rubber in there just to control the wear. So my indicators for being successful is lesion in first lactation, first 60 days in milk, less than 4%. Lactation 1 with lesion per year, less than 5%. All cows with lesion per year, less than 10%. Those are key indicators that I would look for. So other lameness risk factors related to environment would be animal handling, perching stalls, repetitive motion, walking down steep slopes, and flooring. And what we're going to show here is, we're going to show this video here. And this is part of animal handling, also bringing them to the parlor. But remember, when it's hot, those cows don't want to go into the parlor because they're too hot. They just stood in that holding pen for 45 minutes or an hour, overheated. Now they don't want to move anymore. So the only way people do it is to move that crowd gate up, up, up. And then what we have is we have white line lesions. Okay. So very common, that cow here that she's going to have a high risk on the front and the one over there too as well, because she's got to fight that crowd gate. And we could look at this other video as well, but we're going to move on. The other thing is, when cows are perching, all that weight is on the back of the heels, increase in white line lesions in both of those facilities that I worked with. When it comes to repetitive motion, with those grazing cows, the further they walk, the more repetitive motion it is, the more likely they experience white line lesions. Also, when they walk down steep slopes. Slopes greater than 2%, sometimes it's better to have steps because, again, what we see is we see an increase in white line lesions. And in this case, maybe also thin soles are more wear because on the way down, they wear off their heels. On the way up, they wear off their toes, especially when we look at the track condition. So next picture here, next slide is aggressive floor. It's going to be responsible for wear. Unstable floor is going to be responsible for more white line lesions or more clawhorn lesions altogether because the cow is not walking on a good surface. When we look at walking surfaces that contribute to lameness, here we have a cobblestone surface, crowned, always higher incidence of white line lesion. Here we have poor floor construction. So these are mostly cause trauma. This one with too much wear. And here we have the slipping going on. There's no pattern, there's no grooves, nothing. So we have a lot of slipping there. Again, here we have the rough crown. If it's not comfortable for us to walk across that floor, why would it be comfortable for the cows? And the results will always be with all of these will be white line lesions. Yeah. Sole ulcers we can pretty much prevent with functional trimming, but there's too wide of a groove, crowned, slatted floors. The same thing, all the slatted floors facilities I work with in general have a higher incidence of white line lesions unless they're covered with rubber. So, next question. When it comes to good dairy facility floors, which statement describes it best?
Okay, here we go. Your last chance to get the vote right. The first choice, an intense grooving pattern is best for the hoof. Choice 2, any grooving is better than no grooving. Number 3, correct groove, direction of main traffic. And the fourth one is a durable surface, correct grooving in a traffic direction. Okay, well, I'm going to narrow it down to 2 already, Abby. Where are you at on this one?
Mike, my choice is going to be the durable surface plus correct groove in the traffic direction. Which one are you going with?
Yeah, I am too. I'm not going to catch you if I keep voting with you, but I'm going to check number 4 as well. So we'll see what we're looking here. We've got wow, they're voting pretty good here. I'll tell you, people are getting pretty confident. Jim, let's go ahead and close the poll. We got 2/3 in. Not going to dilly-dally, and we can see. Wow, maybe we got it right. Karl, what's your take on this one?
Very, very good. I mean, the second to last one is all right as well, but definitely, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about here is when we go on. So we know the claws require a flat, plain surface with adequate traction. So when we see this is the grooving pattern. Okay, 12.7 millimeters wide or a 1/2 inch wide. We want to have about 2.5 inches or 64 millimeters in the center, and then about a half deep. That should be the depth, and then about 3/4 of an inch or 19 millimeters wide. So dairy farm floors are harsh environments. The pressure that a cow exerts against the floor is similar to an automobile on the road. So if you have 3,000 cows walking to the parlor every day, that's 3,000 cars going in one direction, 3,000 coming in the other direction. So that's why we need a durable surface. Daily scraping, heavy equipment, many other things. You can read up on those. When we look at concrete production, concrete is a paste that coats fine aggregates, coarse aggregates, and then it's put into the dairy. Hydration and heat makes concrete. And the most important thing for everybody to remember is the longer it cures, the stronger it gets. And the other thing is the better the water to cement ratio, the stronger it gets. Years ago, we thought the more cement we put in it, the stronger it gets. But research clearly shows it different. And the other thing is that the curing is the most important. The curing is most important. The 2 factors that must be controlled during the curing is evaporation rate and temperature. And That's what must be kept. The concrete must be kept moist. So in hot weather right now, we should spray that down every day to cure it. It's not a good idea to pour concrete out in the hot sun where it bakes it afterwards. It's going to get the floor like we saw in an earlier picture. And it should be cured above 40 degrees, Fahrenheit, Celsius. So some of you guys have seen this already. I'm not going to go back. These are cut with a machine. Newer dairies have done this now. Very little wear, great surface, good traction for the cows, a square edge. What's the solution when we have the lack of when you have lack of traction or instability? Here I would do a planing, a mini groove solution. Here I would do a mini groove solution, and here would do probably a planing or a mini groove solution, depending on how much crown things are. This is what a mini groove looks like on a shallow mini groove on a very old floor. Really improved that traction on this particular dairy. It was the best thing to do. There's not a one fits it all situation. There's a couple different options. This was not level enough to actually put in the deep groove. It was too uneven. But then here you can see here, this was a crowned surface. It was planed and mini grooves, and it actually works quite well. So just some example. If the deep grooves ever become slippery, we have an option that we could cut some mini groove in the center of it to improve that traction. And then here we have the slatted floors. Really what I've seen is probably the best solution to good traction on slatted floors would be a mini groove. So when it comes just a little bit to rubber covered floors, here you can see slats covered with rubber. They work extremely well if they're covered if they're covered with if we have deep bedded freestyle. Industry saying is always it's more comfortable to stand on rubber flooring. It is more comfortable, but here this is the problem. When standing is more comfortable than laying down, lameness is always the result. So I always see more lameness where cows are standing and not laying down. So I would invest every money I'd had into comfortable freestalls and utilize rubber to control wear, critical areas, corners, 90-degree corners, stuff like that. And with that, standing reduces the circulation, increases the inflammation. And we're going to come to our conclusion. In the last 5 years, there's more evidence there is a high correlation between inflammation and lameness. The sequence that results in clawhorn disruption lesion is logical, makes complete sense to me. I can buy it. I see it daily. The damage is permanent. Only prevention and early diagnosis and treatment is successful. Okay? Timed functional trimming is the best way. The anatomy that determines correct functional trimming. For me, there's only one anatomy. There's not 20 different ways to trim a cow. There's only one way, and to make sure that the anatomy functions properly afterwards. And hoof trimming must improve claw function and reduce inflammation. All management aspects must be put in place to combat and minimize inflammation, daily standing time, heat stress, calving, functional trimming, many of those things. Prevention must start with heifers prior to first calving. Okay? Use claw-friendly floors. Cow cares about the floor she's walking on a lot more than the construction person making the floor. I see that all over the world. The quicker it is done, it's only for the cows. So we have one chance to get the floors right, and you have some information to ask the right questions. And low lameness herds have great cow comfort, good floors, timed hoof trimming, superior lameness diagnosis, and treat lameness promptly. And with that, they have a no lameness tolerance. And I thank you. I went over about 5 minutes here, but I'm sure there is some questions that we need to answer yet.
Excellent. Thank you, Karl, for sharing your expertise on this topic of hoof health. We all know how very important it is for cows to be able to get where they need to be each and every day on 4 functional feet. So thank you for sharing your knowledge on a variety of topics revolving around healthy hooves on our dairy cattle. So again, thank you very much for this presentation. I'd also like to extend our appreciation to Hooves for serving as the sponsor for this particular webinar. For any of you that are online today, or if you'd like to share this webinar with someone else, it will be available online by the end of this week on our archives. You can find this webinar and all of our past webinars from the last 11 years on our website at hordes.com and look for the webinars tab. So please make a trip to that website if you'd like to view any of our past webinars. Next, I'd like to introduce our future webinars. Our series happens the second Monday of every month at noon Central Time. And on August 9th, we have a presentation that is titled Estimating Energy Supply and Requirements of Dairy Cows. And our presenter will be someone who's very familiar to our regular listeners of this webinar series. We have Bill Weiss from The Ohio State University coming to present for that webinar. And then in September on the 13th, we have Bob James, who is a professor emeritus from Virginia Tech University, and he will be talking about raising calves on auto feeders. So if these topics interest you, we hope you'll make plans to attend one or both of these future webinars. Prior to the webinar, those of you that were registered would have received an email and you had the opportunity to ask some questions, and we received a really great group of questions and some really insightful thoughts from people. Karl Burgi had answered some of those questions within the presentation, so you won't find them all here, but there are some more questions here that we'd like Karl to address. And then we also had a number of questions that came in during the presentation. So Mike, I'll have you work through these and we'll see what extra advice Karl can offer to our listeners.
Okay, Karl, here we go. Here's our first one from Egypt, and it says, how does hot weather impact digital dermatitis? And then we'll let you comment on that, and then I'll ask the second part of it.
Well, I guess we just had the discussion. What happens when when the cows are hot? They stand more, so less circulation to the floor. They're standing more in the muck, so there can be very likely an increase of digital dermatitis. Usually what we see is in areas where a sprinkler use, digital dermatitis actually goes down because the manure gets more soupy, the feet are cleaner, but not every place are sprinklers used, so just keep that in mind.
Then under these circumstances, what is the best treatment and how long can I expect a cow to remain in the hospital pen?
With a digital dermatitis treatment, 0 time in a hospital pen. The correct treatment, early identification, correct treatment, a light bandage, 24 hours, remove the bandage, and send her back to her friends in the milking pen.
Okay, let's go to the next question from Uruguay. What chemicals work best in foot baths for grazing animals, especially to harden the hooves? Well,
I have to disappoint here that probably the only thing we can harden is the sole of the claws, because the rest of it has more to do with moisture content. And usually with thin soles, one of the things we can do is we could use like a piece of carpet or a piece of carpet that you use in your house, put that in the bottom of hoof bath and just soak it slightly with 37% formalin and let the cows walk across, because what that will do is it'll pull the moisture out of the sole. We don't want that to splash onto the skin or anything else. We just want to make that sole contact. So that would be an option that is used in some parts of the world. But again, the thin sole problem sometimes is distance walking, rainy season, and all that.
Karl, there's a question that came in that said, what is the appropriate concentration of the copper sulfate and formalin in foot baths? Maybe that just ties in with this question nicely.
So I would say on formalin, especially if we have digital dermatitis, I like to stay 2% or lower, especially if you have a 3.5 to 4 meter bath. Copper sulfate, 2.5%. So 2.5 kilos and 100 liters of water. pH adjusted with like sodium bisulfate to between a pH of 3.0 and 5.0.
And how many cows can go through a bath before you have to change it? How do you determine that?
It depends how clean that bath stays. If we have sidewalls on the baths, as you can see in my last webinars, I have farms we run 900 to 1,000 cows through it. I have farms where there is only 200, 250 going through it. The more soiled it becomes, the more that pH goes up, the less effective that solution is. So end results, and the cows with sidewalls, they will not stop and defecate in the hoof bath.
Okay, one more question from Holland, I believe, and that you already listed that. I think your key KPIs, you listed that a bit earlier. What is the best control strategy for digital dermatitis?
Early diagnosis, treatment of the early acute lesions.
And what's early? Within 24 hours after you first determine it, or?
Well, I mean, those early lesions take about 8 to 10 days to develop. So we need to find them. So if we look at the cows once a week, or the heifers once a week, and treat them after we find them, that's our best strategy to control it and not get them to going to the chronic stage where they start spreading disease around the barn afterwards.
Oh, his last question was, what nutrient interventions are you recommending for hoof health?
Well, Mike, you probably would agree with me that we know that zinc and biotin have an effect on those. Zinc makes a stronger mortar between the cells, and biotin makes a stronger cell wall, if I'm right. So both of those things can have a benefit, and we know it also helps in the prevention, in some cases, of infectious diseases like digital dermatitis and foot rot.
Okay, I'm going to slip this one in right now because it fits, and that is the fat pad. Is this related directly to body condition score, conditions on cows, and weight losses, or are there other factors that impact that fat pad you talked about and showed to us?
Well, I mean, I think the jury is still out on that because we've never really looked at the started at the heifer stage and followed all the way through. Built that. How is the fat well built when that heifer comes off a pasture on the concrete? How does it maintain itself? So there is some data that shows that body condition has something to do with it. Okay, that it increases as body condition increases. But then for me, we know once we lose that fat pad, and we've cut slaughtered feed apart that were in rough shape, there was no fat pad left anymore. So difficult question to answer. There is a lot more information coming out on that. For me, adjusting them heifers on the concrete 6 to 8 weeks prior to calving, doing a functional trim, standing them up on their toes is the best way to preserve the digital cushion.
Okay, let's now go. I think we're done with the questions that came in, and we always welcome them to come in. Kind of in the speed round. Here we go, Karl. What about the correct trimming time for cows on rubber flooring? Is there any differences in rubber flooring versus non-rubber flooring?
Well, when I would say with rubber flooring, we remember the trimming wheel I showed, or the lactation wheel. In the rubber flooring, I would like to, we probably need to get those back feed in at 30 to 45 days in milk, so we get them before they go to peak production, because we really don't want to trim them up to like 100 days. We want them to make milk. We want them to put 45, 60, 70 liters in the tank, because that's what makes the money, and we can trim them afterwards. So there, I would say you would probably need to go like 4 times a year. So we could go pre-dry or at dry off or in the dry pen, 35 days to 45 days in milk, 120 days, and then split it up in 2 trimmings after that.
Another question: how many? What percent of cows should be scored in the 2 and 3 categories when they're on concrete floors? No outside yard and no rubber floors. And that's the Zinpro type scoring, 1 to 5.
1 to 5. I would say less than 2 and 3 should be. I would say 85 to 90% is what I'm seeing today in the good herds.
Okay.
So which means 10 to 15% should be 2s and 3s.
Okay. Question on functional trimming of heifers. Can you take 3 millimeters away from the sole ulcer spot?
You can make that sole ulcer spot until it yields there because there's no pressure on it. So thin it out until there is yield. So if there is 2 millimeters left at the sole ulcer spot, it will never make a lame cow. Maybe we wouldn't do that on a grazing animal, but on a grazing animal, we also don't have the problem with sole ulcers.
Okay. Now, this is related to that. Now, walking on concrete 24/7, how many days will it take for this 3 millimeter to fully flatten in again? Does that make sense to you?
That clearly depends. If there was inflammation at one time, so if we had redness at one time, the bone is damaged, the digital cushion is damaged, it's going to fill in a lot faster. If we never had any inflammation, so we modeled that animal out before calving, I sometimes see 3 to 4 months later, I can still see part of that part I trimmed out. So it takes a lot longer to fill in. So the prevention is so hugely important.
Okay, I think you've answered this one, but here a review. What is the best treatment for IDD, digital dermatitis? Aseptic bandage or just hoof bath? In other words, can I just use the hoof bath and not bandage those animals?
Yes, I think you can just use a hoof bath. Probably if she's in the trimming chute, I would just apply disinfectant, a common disinfectant that you use. But otherwise, most of that should be completely controlled with an effective hoof bath.
Okay. Another interesting question. Should you groove a scrape alley for calves from basically 4 to 20, he says, weeks of age? I think it might be even months of age, would be my guess. But what about young scrape alleys for younger animals? Should you groove them?
We generally groove those scrape alleys the same way as we do the cows, because what we have to remember is heifers are not as active as cows, and even though their claws are smaller, they still get a good traction on those floors, and really we have, I would say, why change it when we have something that's been really working on a lot of farms.
In your travels, have you seen any differences in terms of lameness between barley silage and corn silage?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I've been to some farms, but again, too, at the end is the prevention that we do. I think, and how the whole feeding program, how the silage is preserved, how it is fed, all of that. I think that's my special issue, is probably much more important than what goes into the cow.
Could you expand a bit on what you mean by mini grooves? What is the characteristic of a mini groove by when you talked about it?
So mini groove would be a 6 millimeter groove with a 7 millimeter space, and the 6 millimeter groove and the 7 millimeter space. That's the standard mini groove. Sometimes, like on that old floor that I showed, that old barn floor, we actually went 6, 6, 6, 6, and 6. So we changed that spacing a little bit because there's nothing else we could do, but we didn't go as steep. Where when we go to 6 and 7, we go just a little bit deeper. We go about 3 to 4 millimeter deep. Where in the other one, it's almost like a planing to just get some texture back into that concrete. And the thing we have to remember is when we cut those grooves with a diamond wheel, we don't create more wear because we don't make it sharp edge. We don't make sharp edges. We cut them in with a diamond wheel or diamond blade.
Okay, here's kind of a long question, but I think it's an important one. There's a new claw disruption that I've seen in recent years happening on the entire sole. Our cows are trimmed twice a year, but even though they have not been trimmed, they are presenting the lesion. The claw turns into a shape of a corkscrew, making the sole going into the axle side of the claw. I hope this description makes sense. What could be causing this?
So if it's on the front feet, okay, it could be feet push up, fighting for space on the feet bunk. But also if this is on trimmed animals, it could be from removing the axial wall or the inside wall. If it's on back feet outside claws, not trimming heifers prior to calving would be the number one. If it's on the inside claw on the back feet, it's again, one big thing is removing the axial wall while trimming. So that inside wall up to the toe, trying to take the curve out and make it look beautiful or show type. Or then it has to do with what we talked about before, that adaptation. So a thin sole in the heifer yard, mostly it comes out of places where heifers are raised on sand. We get thin soles. Those animals changed how they walk. And then it changes the whole biomechanics of that whole leg. And the inside claw becomes like an outside claw. And that's a whole new scenario that we've been dealing with here, making better heifer facilities, especially with sand. So I would never put sand in a heifer facility anymore today. Heifers have to be on either manure solids or rubber mats or sawdust or something like that, just to avoid that problem from even occurring.
Here's your last question, and that is, what about stability of the hoof? Once you do the blocking or the trimming, they suggest unstable for 30 to 35 days. Do you agree or disagree, or is that a concern to you?
We need to, there is no stability or not comfortable if the blocks are too short or if they tilt in. So the block should always be perpendicular to the leg, or even maybe a little bit out, tilted out a little bit. The other thing is, the longer the block, the more stability. So I won't use a block that's shorter than 13 centimeters or 5¼ inches long. I don't use any. On a front foot, I might use a 12 centimeter long or 5-inch long. But in the back feet, always longer blocks to create more stability. And I don't see any problems once they're on right. So one of the things is, block cows need to be monitored. If they're not walking on the blocks right, we need to adjust those blocks. So I need to grind them down because blocks do move, blocks do tilt in.
Well, Karl, you've done a yeoman's job in answering lots and lots of questions in a short period of time. Abby, let me turn it back to you to wrap up today's webinar.
Thank you, Mike. And once again, thank you to our speaker, Karl Burgi, for sharing his expertise in the area of hoof trimming and yes, answering all of these questions that came in. We appreciate all of your audience participation, and hopefully we're able to answer many of the questions that we did receive. Looking ahead, our next two webinars, the first will take place on August 9th, and the topic will be estimating energy supply and requirements for dairy cows, presented by Bill Weiss, Ohio State University. And then in September, we'll have a presentation on feeding calves with auto feeders, presented by Bob James from the Virginia Tech University. So please make plans to attend one of those webinars if those topics interest you. And then one more time, I would like to thank Hooves Inc. for sponsoring this webinar. Their support of our program is greatly appreciated. And if you want to learn more about them, please feel free to check them out online. Again, thank you to Karl for speaking on our webinar today. We've had you in the past, and it's always a pleasure to be able to work with you and share your knowledge with all of our listeners. And then last but not least, I'd like to thank our audience for their participation today. We appreciate all of your interest in this topic and for making time to listen in. And we're very grateful to be, even if just a small part of your day. And we hope that this information can be put to good use on your farms or the farms you work with. So until next time, goodbye from all of us here at Hoard's Dairyman and the University of Illinois. And please take care.